We're doing something a little different today. I reread The Hunger Games, and I guess I'm going to talk about it. Yeah, so I was in, and I've continued to be in a mood that I can confidently say I have never been in before, and that is the mood, the desire to reread books. I was kind of looking at my shelf and I was just not really gravitating towards all my new releases, things that were on my TBR shelf. Like, I just had this feeling of like, I want to reread books. And it wasn't just The Hunger Games, although this was spurred on by seeing the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes movie. I hate that title so much, and I don't really want to talk about that movie or that book. Whatever, forget it. The point is that, yes, this was kind of spurred on by seeing that film, because then immediately after we saw that film in theaters, we came home and watched the first Hunger Games movie, which will always have a place in my heart. I love how, like, kind of low budget it looks, and I love the shaky cam. Not everybody loves the shaky cam, but I do. I love a lot of things about that movie. I love when movies don't have a big budget, but they have a lot of passion and charm, and you can just feel that everybody who was working on that movie was giving it 110%, and it really shows. And the issue for me with the Songbirds movie was that it's just too high gloss and honestly a little bit too high concept. That was my first issue with the book anyway, is that here I am talking about this thing I wasn't going to talk about. It's just not for me. It wasn't the story that I wanted, and I am such like a pure, like, I'm a purist when it comes to things. Like, I don't need the sequel. I don't even need the prequel. Honestly, The Hunger Games could have been a completely standalone. I didn't even need the other books. I just loved the first one, and I know that everybody loves the second one, but I am a purist. I really, really am. So that was just, it was just not gonna, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was not going to work for me anyway. But it did kind of make me want to reread The Hunger Games, which I was already in this mood because of just how a little bit lackluster my reading had been feeling. And I knew that I could fly through The Hunger Games because it's YA, because the writing style is very accessible and it just moves quick. It's action-packed. I remember a lot of it, so it was kind of just like a little indulgent. Let me just do this just for the heck of it. And I want to talk about what that reading experience was like as an adult, a 26, nearly 27-year-old, and having, been in the generation that this was aimed at. Like I was there when the book came out. I was the right age when the book came out, or the target age, I should say. And I was there for the boom and everything that came after this Hunger Games experience, as we all were, but really just being in the height of it at the time, at the age that that it was targeted towards, it's just a really unique experience. As you can already tell, this is going to be a very casual and just a little bit chaotic. Like, I don't really have much of a script, but I do have some notes that I'm going to be looking at, and just, this is going to just be a very casual, chatty video about The Hunger Games. Yay! Okay, so thinking about when I read this book for the first time. So I have actually never reread it. I had never reread it. I only remember reading it once, and that was when it first came out, when I was in middle school. I was probably in like 7th grade, maybe even younger. So I read it, and this is actually so ridiculous, but we read it as a class book when I was in 7th grade. Like, I'm sorry, that is so crazy, because the book had literally just came out. So this, somehow my teacher had managed to get the Hunger Games book on her class curriculum. What? That's so crazy. But I'm glad that she did, because what that result was is that instead of rushing through this, like reading it in one sitting, we actually were forced to discuss it and really look at all of the things that were going on in this book, which, is a lot considering that it's a YA dystopia. Well, I mean, it's really the blueprint for the YA dystopia genre, and there's a reason that it stands out and it stands the test of time far better than pretty much anything else in that genre. And there's a reason why it is so beloved by so many. And obviously, I am not the only person to be rereading The Hunger Games right now because of the Songbirds movie, but it really just got me thinking, you know, anytime I see a prequel or a reboot or a remake or whatever that inevitably does not live up to the first one, although I get it, some people really liked the Songbirds one, they loved it, and I respect them for that. You can have that opinion, but in my mind, it's just never going to live up to the original. Again, I'm a purist in that way. But, you know, I'm far from the only person reading this right now or rereading it or just, you know, coming back into this world because it has been brought to, you know, the forefront of pop culture once again. For me, I always get that urge to go back to the source, the original one, and just think like, what is it about this thing that worked so well, and why can it not be recreated? In my opinion, I know people love Catching Fire, people love the Songbirds movie, okay? So in their mind, it was recreated. In my mind, it was not, although after my experience with Hunger Games, and maybe I should try to reread Catching Fire, because as we'll get into it, I remember my emotions, and that kind of, I think that sometimes my emotions of what I was feeling in that moment got in the way of my actual appreciation for the book, the writing, the story, and I will explain what I mean as I get into some of these live reaction notes. I'm like going back and forth, like, should I say anything about like what my feelings were about the Songbirds movie? I mean, like, I overall, I just don't like things with that super high gloss brand new feel to it. That high budget look is just not my favorite. It virtually like never works for me, so that's kind of, you know, but it is what it is. The performances, I thought the main guy was pretty good, but perhaps controversial opinion, I did not think that the main girl, who now I can't even remember her name, sorry, I did not think that she really worked as Lucy Greybeard. It did not sell it for me, and that character did not leap off the screen the way that she really needed to in order for that story to work. So that was kind of an issue. The other performances, fine. I think generally kind of unmemorable. I think like the problem for me is that and why I like the first one so much, the film, is that those performances were so strong in that they were so like real and passionate, and I feel like with the new one, you're aware that they're playing a character, that they really do not quite immerse themselves in the performance the way that, you know, Jennifer Lawrence did as Katniss. Like, now the main guy, I do think he did good, but I do think that like other characters, like Viola Davis's character, I am straight up blanking on actors' names, and that really does not happen to me very often, but the side characters, I do think they were a bit too caricature-ish. I think they were just too not real people, and that was a bit distracting for me. And just overall, like, the other tributes were so unmemorable that it didn't land. But again, this is all my opinion, and I really don't care if you liked it. I'm happy for you. I'm just explaining that comparison as we get into my thoughts on this. Okay, so here are my reread reaction notes for my reread of The Hunger Games. My first time reading it as an adult. Let's see what I thought. Okay, I said, I still hate first person. Yeah, that's true. I have never liked first person stories, or that's not fair to say. It's not that I don't like them, it's just they tend not to be my favorite way into a story because the characters tend to be really boring and just not who I like to follow. Like, if I'm gonna follow a story, regardless of, you know, what perspective it's in, I do tend to like more extraordinary characters. I don't like to read from average everyday people and more often than not, the characters, there's just nothing that distinguishes them about their voice, about their opinions, about anything really. Like, they're just not very interesting. And first person is absolutely brutal if you do not like the character. So I still hate first person, but as I will get into, Katniss is a big exception to this rule, and probably the character that comes to mind the most when I think of a first person done really, really well. I said this YA writing style, oh my gosh, there's so many short sentences in this book. There are really so many, like, they are just like short sentences. This is how I said this YA writing style with so many short sentences broken up like this. Like, there are so many sentences that are just tiny little bits, and I get it. I get what she's doing with Katniss as this like very emotionless, kind of like straightforward person that she's gonna like think in these like short bursts. And I think it's funny because that's very typical of especially YA writing, where they have really short sentences that have, you know, like no description, and they just like use a very cut and dry punctuation. I just think it's funny and also a little bit aggravating. It's why I don't read YA very often. Then I said Katniss's characterization comes through so distinctly and so quickly, and it's really great. By page 6, you have a really good sense of not only who she is, but why she's the way that she is, and that's really impressive. Yeah, I do think that, you know, there were times that I actually wanted to highlight, wanted to tab, which is, again, not something that I would normally do, but there were just moments, like there were just lines, even as early on as pages, 5 and 6, that really distill the character into her essence. You understand who this person is so quickly, which is important, first of all, in a YA book to capture the attention of the reader and understand who you're following, but also just, this is a short page count, or I should say it's a short book in that it reads really fast. The text is quite large on the page, and we are really jumping into the story very, very quickly. So we need to understand who we're following, and I like that. I don't like to sit there through half a book and still not really understand who this character is. So I appreciated how quickly we get a sense of who Katniss is, and it just works in this setting so well. Then I said, compulsively readable, spewing world-building factoids left and right, but it's also interesting. Yes, another hallmark of YA, sci-fi, fantasy. It's the world building that is just like thrown at you in such an aggressive way. But again, we like Katniss so much so early on. Like, she's just giving us this interesting facts, and it's just, yeah, you just want to know. You're just like, what in the world is going on here? Like, why are they doing this? And the world building is very thoughtful, actually. It's simple. That's the thing. It's not hard to understand. It's not super complex. It is a very distilled version of, the worst kind of society, and because it is so simple and easy to grasp, and it's so extreme, it just makes it so fascinating. Because a lot of times, sometimes like the world building is so complicated that the essence of it gets lost. But if there's one thing Suzanne Collins understood, it is how to distill her people, places, ideas into its most extreme and intensely hard-hitting, captivating version of itself. I said, it's been a really long time since I read this book, and having never reread it, I wouldn't have noticed this, but there's a lot of ideas and concepts that are planted very early on, and I always appreciate that, and I definitely appreciated it when I was really young, and this was kind of the first, I was in my stage where I was discovering what writing could be, and having those plants of those early seeds that then, grow into something and mean something later in the book, that's just really fun. And it continues to be fun. It's fun to find it here, knowing, and then I read books, written for adults, and they think they're doing something like that, and they're just not. So it's fun to see how it can actually really work well. YA books read so quick. Yeah, I devoured this very, very quickly. I mean, you could read it in one sitting, basically, or, I read it in 2. You fly through 100 pages. That's why I wanted to reread it, because I was like, I just wanted the satisfaction of being able to, get through a book quickly and not slog through it, because I knew this was just one that you just devour. There was a quote about not real flames, the flames that are on her clothes, and Cinna says that they're not real flames, and I just thought that was like so ridiculous. Like, what do you mean? How do you make a fake flame that still acts like real flame? Like, I just thought that was silly and ridiculous. You can really feel the teenage over-exaggerated emotions. Props to Suzanne Collin for pulling that off. Yeah, there are a lot of times where the emotions are extremely heightened due to the young characters. And even though Katniss is quite mature, and that's what I love about her, is that she really thinks through every single thing. She explains her thought process and you understand it implicitly, which I really love, but there's definitely moments where she just bursts into emotions like teenagers do, and props to Suzanne Collins for being able to write that effectively. I said small thing, but I like how in the movies they gave all the tributes uniforms to wear at every stage. They do eventually get like a common uniform to wear in the games, but I liked the visual and of the film when they're all wearing like the jackets and stuff. I just thought it was a nice touch. The social commentary is not subtle, but not out of place. I like an unsubtle commentary in YA, and yeah, that is true. I think in adult books, I need more nuance. I need to have the issues looked at from a lot of different sides. I need to understand this sole character's perspective on this issue, and I need it to be picked apart a lot. I love nuance in my social commentary. In YA though, I need it to make sense, and I need it to have a clear message, and I need it to be able to be understood fairly easily. And not to say that there's no nuance in this book, because there's actually a lot of nuance, which is again why it stands the test of time, why so many people love it, because it's not surface level. It's actually, it does have a message, it does have something to say, and it's not out of place, and it's not like super in your face. It's there if you're looking for it. What I love about it is that if you are a younger person reading this with not a lot of experience with, literary metaphor and analogy and stuff like that, you're gonna have that light bulb moment where you're like, oh wow, this is just like this thing in our real world. And of course that's the idea, but it's the joy and the experience of young people reading this book and coming to their own conclusions. And I just think that's really fun. But at the same time, it cannot be muddled. And I think Suzanne Collins she's not holding back. This is not subtle commentary by any means, and I really love that. There's so much build up to the games. I can feel myself getting antsy, but like in a good way. Like I love a countdown. Like, oh, there's 3 days left to the games. There's this, like, I just love the build up. It works so well. We are over 100 pages by the time we start the games, and it just feels earned, honestly. I feel like some complaint could be that it takes too long to get there, but all of that stuff in the beginning becomes so important, and it just makes so much sense, and it's still interesting. It's still interesting the whole time. This is just something I noticed. After the interviews, 4 of the tributes end up in an elevator alone. And how does that happen? Like, they end up in just the elevator by themselves because they say that their like handlers like didn't fit in the elevator or something. What? There's no, like, how could the 4 tributes end up alone in the elevator? Certainly that's super dangerous, and also like could potentially allow for some cheating or something. I guess, they do spend time together in the training facility, so it's not like they're not allowed to talk to each other, but it just seems like having 4 of them alone in an elevator seems like really dangerous. Like, they could be doing something totally out of pocket and nobody would be able to do anything about it. That would never happen. Like, in this situation where everything is hyper controlled, the handlers would be like literally not letting them out of sight. So that I just thought was ridiculous, and I wanted to point it out. Especially, they're right before the games. Like, how are they not extremely chaperoned the second? This is like the night before the games start. Like, no. I said, I completely forgot about the line where they say that past arenas are used as tourist and vacation spots, meant to be similar to visiting like the Roman Colosseum. On page 44, that's 44, 45 is where it says that. And yeah, I completely forgot that was a thing. That's crazy. How does that even work? Like, I guess what I linked it to in my mind was like, when you go to Rome, you visit the Colosseum, where And actually, I'm not even sure. I, to be honest, don't know the entire history of the Colosseum. I feel like it's somewhat of a myth that they just held constant death matches there. I feel like that is not entirely true, but I don't know. I actually don't know. I do not know my Roman history. So I think like that is what we were meant to compare it to. But still, that's crazy. That is really crazy. Like, I know that this world is literally insane and they're gonna watch a child death match on TV, but I think it's a whole nother level to then use those arenas as vacation destinations, and they go and they watch reenactments of the games and they stand in the areas that the kids died. Like, that's a whole new level of crazy. I said there's such a palpable sense of dread and terror right before she enters the arena, and it's just really good writing right there. Well done, Suzanne Collins. You feel the terror that she feels. And I said Katniss is brave, like really genuinely brave, like not YA protagonist brave, like actually brave. She genuinely wants to run towards the cornucopia and fight over it leaving empty-handed. And I feel like, yeah, that is like when there's YA protagonists written, you often hear them, other people say, oh, you're so brave, or you're brave. But because we're so inside of Katniss's head, we understand what she fears and what she doesn't, and what she mostly fears, like, is people that she cares about getting hurt. But and we understand that like there are things that she doesn't want to do, but she knows she has to do, and she does them anyway. And that's really brave. That is, yeah, I just think she's like a genuinely brave character. It's not a character trait of her. It's not like, oh, she's the brave one. It's just like, that's just part of who she is. And it's hard to get that right as an author, because sometimes you get so stuck in like character tropes, like, oh, this one's the brave one, this one's the smart one. But it's like, here we have this character, which is why I just love Katniss as a character so much, because she really was outside of the mold at the time of this being written. And then of course there was a bunch of Katniss copies that couldn't even get close to her. But that's because, yeah, it's like she was intrinsically brave in a way that is hard to capture. What I've always loved about the first Hunger Games and other types of stories after that is that Katniss is a survivalist, and my favorite type of dystopia survival story is when the biggest threats are natural. I actually talked about this recently in my book haul when I was talking about Near the Bone, but yeah, I like survivalist stories, like where you really genuinely have to understand and work off of the land, and just like the average person could not survive this. Those are what's interesting to me. The detail, another thing I've always loved about the Hunger Games is following Katniss's head. I love how she thinks over every step she takes. And the Hunger Games is one of my favorite uses of first person, which again, I rarely like. Yeah, there is, oh gosh, Katniss is so fun. She's so fun to be inside the head of. She thinks, she's just so wicked smart, and she just thinks through absolutely everything. And it is just a really great use. Like, if we're gonna use first person, this is how I want it done, because I want that character to be so unlike a normal person that you just cannot help but loving being in her head. And that's exactly what we get here. I love survival horror stories where the natural elements are as much of a threat as the monster or killers. Yeah, it's just something I've always loved. And I said, is Katniss lucky? Because some people have tried to argue that like, oh, she just wins because she's lucky, but I don't think I agree with that. Like, in many ways, yes, there's definitely ways that she does get lucky. Otherwise, you know, it wouldn't be fun to follow someone who didn't win, or maybe it would actually. I've kind of thought about that too, but I wouldn't say that she's winning solely because of luck. Like, she's obviously very skilled, very smart. Yeah, and she faces a lot more pain and hardship in the book than the film. In the film, she has a couple moments, but in the book, man, oh my gosh, pretty much every second that she's out there, she is struggling in some way. Another thing I really like to read, I don't want it to be easy for the characters. I just don't. And there's not a moment, well, there's like very, very few moments where she's ever comfortable. And in the film, it kind of seems like she's, you know, obviously she's having a hard time, but not as hard. But in the book, she's literally starving, like, and I'll get to that in a minute, cold, in such pain, thirsty, like there's just constant struggle. I said Rue's death scene is as painful and emotional as ever, and yeah, it hits hard. It really, really does. a really well written scene. It sticks with you, and whew, it's a good scene. It's a really good scene. And I said, I think the continued focus on food in the Hunger Games, the titular Hunger Games, um, it's so powerful. Like, the film cannot really capture how much time and effort Katniss spends thinking about and getting food. They just, the film does not have time for that. But in the book, it is constant. It is really a big factor for her in her life before the games, but also during the games. Like, the sole thing that she's thinking about, like, most of the time is getting food, is food and water. And the reason that she ends up blowing the supplies, which is not entirely clear in the movie, or I think this is just kind of missed a little bit, but the reason that she chooses to do that is not just to be like aggressive and like make a big move, but it's because she believes that her fellow contestants will not be able to survive on their own if they have to go and that they have to hunt and they have to get food on their own, and that they will simply not be able to deal with being hungry and starving. And so that's really her motivation for blowing up the supplies, is that she thinks that the other tributes will not be able to survive on their own. They're not used to being hungry the way that she's used to being hungry. That line has always stuck with me. And it's such a big part of the book that the film just cannot capture. The line, "I wonder if the thing someone needs desperately is a good blanket," has stuck with me since I read the book for the first time in middle school. I don't know why, but I never forgot that line. It has stuck with me all this time. And then I said, the games go on for 2 weeks. That was a little bit shocking because of course the film has to shorten it to like 4 days max, but 2 weeks seems like a long time that they would allow the games to go on. Like, I don't know, like I get, and it's talked about throughout the course of the book that if there's enough action during the day, like the game makers won't force them together. So it can go on for a little bit longer. And also, like, the arena is massive, like really, really big. Like, she talks about walking some like 10 miles or something. And that's only a tiny portion of the arena. So you're thinking it's like 30 miles wide or something. I don't know. It doesn't say the actual size of it, but as far as Katniss walks, like, she talks about taking an entire day's worth of walking to get from one location in the arena to another. So, and I know that, like, they're not moving super fast all the time, but that is a lot of space. That is a lot of space that you're allowing them to roam in, which is why sometimes, like, she goes a long time without seeing other contestants, which obviously good for her. But it seems shocking that they would allow that kind of space if they did want them to fight all the time, and also that they would allow it to go on for so long, because if you think about it from like a viewership perspective, it seems like 2 weeks is just unmanageable. But then again, they need something to keep the people watching, like, and also like the Olympic Games go on for that long, so like if that's what this is kind of being compared to, I guess, yeah, that sort of makes sense. But I was just shocked. Like, 2 weeks seems like a really long time. I said, I like Peeta more this time around. I remember hating him, like absolutely hating him, for no reason other than he slowed Katniss down. But yeah, I guess he did a couple helpful things, and I liked how much deeper the discussion of him giving her the bread goes, and I see why it's important now. I don't think I got that strong of a feeling when I was reading it as a child. There's a lot of parts of this book that I just absolutely did not comprehend to the fullest of their abilities when I was a kid. Obviously, you just can't comprehend everything. But I remember just absolutely hating Peeta. And maybe this is just because, especially when I was young, like middle school, high school, any hint of romance, I was just not really about it. Even though I did like Twilight, which is a bit ironic, but like romance, and still to this day, romance does not really do anything for me in books. And I think I was just maybe frustrated that so much of it focused on a romance, even though I understood that it was like for the cameras and this was like a strategy that she was using. But I think I just really did not like Peeta, because to me, Peeta felt like kind of worthless. Like, he could not. That's why I liked Gale, because he could actually be helpful, and I felt Peeta was slowing Katniss down, and I didn't like to see anybody in the way of her success. it just made things harder for her. Like, she could have won easily without having to help. You know, if she didn't have to help Peta, she could have won much, much easier. But I get that that's not the point. I get it. I do. And I did like him more this time around. He is really sweet. He is really nice. I kind of just thought he was like a bumbling idiot when I read it as a kid. But I understand his character a lot more. He's still not my favorite though. But I don't really, you know, this like Gale versus Peta dynamic is just so unimportant and uninteresting to me that I just like don't care. And the last thing I said was that it holds up so well. Katniss remains one of my favorite protagonists ever. And yeah, that is true. That is true. She is still one of my favorite protagonists. I love, you know, if you're going to do first person, there needs to be a really good reason. And this is a really good reason. And it's done so well. And Katniss is so interesting as a person. And she's so smart and she's so brave. And she's a great role model for, you know, the young adults that would be reading this book. And I do think about how this book holds up so well, just because it really is from a place of passion, and it makes sense, you know, like people can feel passion come through in art projects, whether it's films or books or, you know, music, whatever it is. People really can feel that genuine passion. When we used to get Hunger Games ripoffs, dystopian, you know, just all of this like mush of people trying to recreate this magic, it didn't work because people can see through it. They can feel that you're just trying to recreate something that does not come from an authentic place. And yes, you could argue that that this was inspired by like Battle Royale or whatever. That look, there's been Death Games media forever. This is far from the first, far from the last. Like, that's not the point. The point is that the character of Katniss specifically really is the heart of this story, and that's why it works so well for me. I'm so happy that I did decide to reread this because the reading experience was fantastic. Honestly, it was a fast read. It hit all the things that I wanted. Katniss is so fun. There is definitely a couple moments where the writing is like not great, but it's made up for in the moments that the writing is really fantastic and really works. And of course, like this in general, this writing style is not perfectly to my taste because I do like things that are more flowery, more descriptive. This is pretty sparse, and it's meant to be kind of barren and sad and intense. And again, in the context, it really works. This really kind of satisfied the itch of rereading something. And I'm still kind of on my rereading desire, because I look at some of my favorite shelf and I'm like, yeah, I want that feeling again. And this gets better on a reread. It really does. I don't know if I'm gonna read the other ones. I have no interest in reading Mockingjay, but I might read Catching Fire because I know that so many people love it. And this is what I mean when I say that my emotions kind of got in my way of my enjoyment, because when it first came out, I was like, well, what could you possibly do with book 2? Like, is she gonna go back in the arena? And then the fact that she does, like, kind of just like made me mad for no reason other than like, again, like, I don't know, I was just an emotional child, whatever. But because I was already annoyed with the premise, I think I didn't give it the most fair chance. Yeah, I will maybe reread it at some point. I don't know when, but again, I love the first one. I love the original. I gave this a 5 stars on Reread. Even though it's not absolutely perfect all the time, it is as good as a YA book is ever going to get, in my opinion. I just loved it, and it was a good reading experience. And this is just part of my New Year's goal, which is to read things that I want to read and not be influenced by numbers of books that you've read or, you know, new books that you've read. If there's something you want to read, just read it, because rereading is not something I ever do, and it's just kind of sad because I'd probably have, you know, a good experience rereading more, and this hit all the notes that I wanted it to hit. Those are my thoughts, having reread The Hunger Games just for fun, and this is me telling you that if there's something you want to read, just do it. You will not regret it. You won't regret it. There's no numbers, no Goodreads numbers or whatever that are more important than making yourself happy. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, week, month, year, and I will see you back here real soon with who knows what we're gonna have next. But this was a lot of fun. Bye.